More major changes at Aston Martin as Andy Cowell kicks off 2025 by, well, giving himself a new job. Got Scott with me to discuss what's happening at Aston. Scott, what's changing under Cowell's leadership?
Yes, there's an organisational restructuring at Aston in a bid to not quite save its failing F1 mission, but certainly give it a much needed boost and better clarity and direction going forward. So Cowell, who was appointed as Group CEO for Aston Martin, basically running the whole thing, including the F1 team as well, he comes in as team principal and CEO for the F1 team as well. Mike Crack still remains in a key role for Aston Martin on the F1 side. He is now Chief Trackside Officer, which is a new bit of terminology. We haven't heard that from a team before. He'll be basically Cowell's number two, and he'll be the most senior figure trackside when Cowell's not there, because Cowell won't be attending every single race. There's a change in how Cowell wants things to work between trackside and the factory. That'll mean a slightly unspecific thing, but Chief Technical Officer Enrico Cardile, who's joining, he'll basically be overseeing everything at the factory. And then one other key change that's been announced is that Performance Director Tom McCulloch's been removed from day-to-day F1 duties. As my understanding is, he won't have any F1 responsibilities moving forward, but he will have another role somewhere else within the group and focus on expanding Aston's racing activities.
Quite a lot to unpick there, but is it just a case of, heads and chairs shuffling behind the scenes, or is there a wider significance that we need to pay attention to?
Yeah, it's not as big a single move as hiring Adrian Newey or the Cardile from Ferrari News or anything like that. But it's also not just a small internal reshuffle. Anytime you change a team principal, that's a big thing, because that's outwardly, just from a public PR perspective, it's a significant change to make. It can convey a sense of no confidence in the predecessor, especially if they get moved on. But the fact that Crack's been moved somewhere else obviously naturally lessens that. But anytime you have a team principal change, anytime you have new leadership positions being created or revised, and in the case of someone like McCulloch, someone being removed out of the F1 sphere entirely, yes, he's not been sacked, but he isn't going to be on F1 duty anymore. That is another example of how significant that it is, and it's wrapped up in this kind of wider context of the Aston project faltering at the moment. It's still too early to say it's failing, because everything kind of needs to start coming together from 2026, but it's been stuttering. It's been taking steps back, not just steps forward. The trajectory is never linear in Formula One when you're trying to get to the front, but it's had way too many dips, and it's regressed a little bit in that time as well. So when you kind of package all of that together, what Aston's been going through, what it's trying to achieve, what's still on the horizon, and then you see the magnitude of the changes, it's a pretty big deal, yeah.
Well, it's felt like, certainly last year, the trajectory has been backwards, a regression. I think you used that word, regression, Scott. And they seem to have been searching around maybe for scapegoats. We saw, obviously, Dan Fallows bite the dust, if you like, F1-wise last season. And it felt also like, the trackside element would eventually come into focus, mainly because, that element of performance development lacking relies also on the trackside feedback and the real-world data. And Alonso had been calling that into question too, often deferring questions asked at races when Aston had underperformed. So do we think this is going to fix that issue? How are these changes actually going to manifest in an uplift for performance short term for Aston Martin?
Yeah, that's obviously why the changes have happened. They're designed to fix problems that Cowell has seen since coming in as Group CEO. He's been in the job for just over 3 months. I'm pretty sure this announcement has come on day 101 for him. So he's cleared the 100-day mark. I'm sure this isn't quite how Aston would have wanted to mark 100 days in the job by making a load of changes, but that is kind of always the way. You see it in politics, you see it in F1, you see it in other sports and businesses. New management comes in, feet under the table. You spend a lot of time, usually around 100 days, assessing, and then you start to make your mark. And that is what Cal's done here. So, yes, there are some specific things that haven't quite worked in terms of that flow from trackside back to the factory. We'll get on to that and how McCulloch kind of fed into that, or maybe fed into that, and what people thought of that in a moment, but just specifically on what I think Cowell's identified as the issues. I think from a trackside and a factory perspective, I think he's seen a little bit too much divergence from people's actual responsibilities to what they ended up doing. I think people got pulled into different areas. I think there were people at cross purposes sometimes. And Cowell, when he spoke to the media in the United States Grand Prix last year, which would have been in October, so very early in the job for him, he wasn't talking about Aston specifically, but he said he hates it when people have clashing responsibilities. And the only thing that makes him grumpier than that was the phrasing that he used, is when there's poor communication. I think based on these changes, that's what he has seen, which has been the root cause of the issue, of the wider issues that we have then seen outwardly. So your lack of development, the struggle to understand why developments aren't working, the ultimately lack of performance that's being put on the cars through a season, because Aston was quite good at getting its ducks in a row in the off season and starting the year fairly competitively. It was just the trajectory after that. I think what Cowell has seen and what he's trying to address with these changes is the team at the factory need to know what their jobs are and optimize doing their jobs. And then there needs to be trust and communication between the different departments and then between factory and trackside to make sure you bring everything together and ensure that you're addressing the right areas.
Yeah, it always felt like maybe Aston was getting a bit bloated, signing so many people, trying to sort of bolt them into a structure that had a lot of legacy staff as well. I mean, Tom McCulloch being moved on, it kind of feels like the final purge of legacy, notable Force India staff in terms of, forward-facing, public-facing people. And it also seems like, there's 2026 element, they need to focus on the bigger picture, and that makes sense to have a lot of senior technical people so you can kind of split your strategies. But obviously on the short term, you need an uplift in performance, and it feels like Cowell's maybe trying to streamline the team and get rid of some of this bloat heading into the new season.
It wouldn't surprise me if he has felt that the team's too top heavy in certain places. I mean, if you look at it from that trackside perspective, with Crack as team principal, you have he is one of the former engineers turned team principals that we've seen come to the fore in the last few seasons, and Crack was a really, really high level engineer in Formula One and outside of Formula One. He's not your businessman turned team principal. He's not your former racing driver turned businessman turned team principal or anything like that. He gets that stuff, which means at the track he was not interfering with engineering and things like that, but he was a presence within engineering and he was a contributing voice to engineering. And part of his remit would have then been, alongside McCulloch as performance director, to then feed back at the factory, right, this is what's working, this is what we think's not working, and so on and so forth. But between the day-to-day engineering people at the track, not just your race engineers and your performance engineers, but the actual core engineering team, plus McCulloch on top of that as performance director, plus Crack as team principal, I don't think Aston has a dedicated F1 chief engineer, which is actually a role that Crack had back in the day, I think, for BMW Sauber. I think what they want to do is kind of have that engineering side of things at the track a little bit more focused. So Crack's role as chief trackside officer will effectively be, it's not just a glorified team manager role. He'll be the most senior person when Cowell's not there, but I think he'll also still be in those engineering meetings. And then a big part of his remit will be when they go away, it's Crack's responsibility to ensure that back at the factory, the flow of communication from what's happened at the track is as clear and as strong as it can be. And I think that's probably going to be the same on the factory and technical side, but we can get onto that more specifically in a moment.
Yeah, I suppose it'd be interesting to see if Crack sees it as a demotion or rather a move into a role that better suits him, and therefore he feels a certain sense of relief that he can hand off some of this wider team responsibility to Cowell. As you mentioned, bigger changes are coming as well. This is not the end of the Aston Martin restructure story, because we've got, Cardile joining. We don't know the date he's going to start yet, and obviously Newey's impending arrival, I think, in March, isn't it? So how do you see this kind of all playing out as kind of more big beasts join the system in the coming weeks?
Yeah, well, when Cardile starts and how Newey fits in and what they do with that structure it's going to be the defining factor in this Aston Martin project, I think. It might still be a little bit of a way off as we sit here and record this now. We're a week away from doing our live shows taking the Race F1 podcast live in London and Birmingham. If you want to come, we'll put a link on screen and in the description. I suspect we're not going to have a definitive Aston Martin complete structure to discuss when we do those shows in mid-January, but it can't be far off, because when I spoke to someone from Aston Martin when this news came out, they can't give a date on Cardile at the moment. Now, that could be that they know when he's starting. Maybe he's already started and they're just not letting on at the moment. I think it means they don't quite have him yet, and I don't think they quite know. But I could be wrong on that. We know that Newey's coming in a couple of months, but he can't do anything before then. But how Cowell wants to shape that technical structure, or how Newey might want it to exist, is going to be really important, because obviously you mentioned earlier, Ben, they've got rid of Fallows as technical director. They kind of have Bob Bell, who's been bigger picture on the 2026 stuff, I think doing some interim TD duties. But I don't know how you feel about it. One, I think the technical director role has almost been usurped by the chief technical officer role, because it's no longer the most senior technical position within an F1 team, which is so vast and so sprawling. And coming back to that point about being top heavy, we know that Aston was building this technical super team, but do you need a chief technical officer, an engineering director like they have in Luca Fabato? Then you've got obviously Newey as the managing technical partner, or whatever his specific name is. When you have your specific department heads as well, like aerodynamics and whatnot, do you need a technical director within that? These are the questions that Aston need to answer and settle.
Yeah, it's slightly confusing, isn't it? Because they've got these dual programs going on. You know, a section on 2026, obviously a now focused 2025 team, some overlap, which is something it seems Cowell doesn't like anyway, but it's necessary when you've got the dual programs going on. And I kind of get that for 2025 and the short term and just how the racing structure works, this idea of splitting or better delineating the factory and race team responsibilities and trying to eliminate overlap there. But it seems quite clear they want Cardile to be factory focused. You know, he's not going to be a at the track TD. He's going to be just working on new cars. But I know Newey's going there as a kind of partner, not a kind of traditional technical leader. But it feels like you'd also want him to be involved in that process heavily. So it still remains to be seen for me how he and Cardile exactly fit together, and whether Newey treads on Cardile's toes or vice versa.
Well, I think that that problem will come down specifically to how well they work together. If they gel well early on, and Cardile sees that Newey's benefits in terms of his direct involvement on car design and suggestions and that kind of thing are for him to interject here, interject there. The term that we use quite a lot is sprinkling his gold dust in different kind of places, while Cardile actually manages the core functions of designing and developing the F1 car and making sure that all those pieces are in place. Newey's broader role, I think, given he's coming in at that partner level, I think will be to bring his vast amounts of experience and success, including very recently, so he knows better than anybody within that structure what a top F1 team needs, will be to make sure that other elements of that technical structure are as strong as they can be. He'll be advising Cardile on things that can be improved. He'll look at stuff, and I'm pretty sure in terms of processes, in terms of knowledge, in terms of where Aston Martin's looking and how they're going about addressing things, those will be the areas where Newey, I think, can have a core kind of contribution to make. There's a lot of crossover inevitably between what he can bring and what Cardile can bring, and what they both will bring and what they want to improve. Given their specific remits, I think they can coexist, especially if there isn't a technical director in the structure, because that is going to then be Cardile's concern, the day-to-day leadership of the technical organisation, as well as setting it, with Newey sort of flitting in and out. So that is probably how Cowell will want to see you characterised it perfectly. That's the specific word Cowell used, overlap of responsibilities on the technical side. If that can then work and function a little bit more seamlessly, a little bit more collaboratively, a little bit more optimised than with the trackside team than it has done so far, you could start to see Aston Martin make gains immediately in 2025, not just waiting for it all to come together in 2026.